what is the English section, right? So the course schedule, first off, we are going to cover grammar, punctuation, and usage. Those are that's one subset of the information that you'll have on the test. Lesson 2 will be covering sentence structure. We're basically moving from kind of small units to big. Strategy and organization. So you are actually asked to manage not just a given clause or a given sentence, but also an entire passage, and manage what goes where, what can be used effectively. You know, could this sentence be written better, and could the idea that's being expressed be expressed better? And then finally in Lesson 4, style, which goes beyond simple grammatical rules and what's, you know, quote unquote right, and what's actually simply preferred or better or clearer. So we'll be covering all of these topics in the course of these lessons and giving you strategies and practice questions. Also, at the end of every lesson, there will be homework assigned to you that you can practice whatever topic. Note that we will have these topics tagged as we go through them in the lesson. So if there's a particular one that strikes you as being something that you want additional practice on or enjoyed and want to perfect your skills, those same tags can be used to create custom games on Grocket. Okay, so the English section, 75 questions in 45 minutes. That's not a ton of time, and you do actually have to cover a wide range of topics. So punctuation, I'll move the cursor out of the way there. Punctuation, 10 questions, that's 13% of the test. I went ahead and did the math for you since calculators are not allowed on the English section. And grammar and usage, another 12 questions, that's 16%. And then sentence structure, which we'll get into next time, is 18 questions, which is probably the single biggest section of the exam. The writing strategy, you know, what should you write in a certain place, organization of passages and sentences within them, and then style issues are all more on the order of the grammar and usage section. You may be wondering, what's the deal with this line across the page? Well, you do actually have 2 sub-scores on this section of the test. Not all sections of the ACT have sub-scores, but sometimes when skills can be divided into sub-areas where someone might care how you do on one certain type of problem versus some other type, they create these sub-scores so that people can see where your strengths or weaknesses are. So everything above this line goes into the usage and mechanics subscore. And everything below this line goes into the rhetorical skills. And so what they mean by this, usage is the English language as it's used correctly. And there are you can express a given idea multiple ways in grammatically correct ways. And it's going to be, this section tests your ability to identify the correct ways. Note that they may actually give you more than one grammatically correct answer. It will still be your job to decide on the best one, and those reasons why an answer might be best over some other grammatically correct answer lie in the area of rhetoric and stuff like that. So mechanics then, of course, are the nuts and bolts of the language. You know, did you use the right verb form with your subject? So if the subject is singular, did you use a singular verb? Or did you correct them when they incorrectly used a plural verb with a singular subject? So usage and mechanics, did you use the right word in the right place? Do you have grammatically correct formal written English in your stuff? Rhetorical skills are more about how messages are conveyed. So writing strategy, organization, and style, this is definitely the territory of there is no one right answer. There is one right answer on the ACT, let's just be clear about that, and we will talk about the principles of what goes into a right answer on the ACT, but in English you can have more than one grammatically correct answer that is not necessarily the best way of expressing something. And so, I mean, overall, your overarching principles should be concision. When you write things as concisely as possible, you don't put in extra words. And when you write, and you also want to be as consistent. And so consistency is the other aim. These are the 2 aims for differentiating those 2 areas. And of course, we'll get to that when we get to those sections. But just know that that will still come up in some of the parts that we're doing today. So, Again, 75 questions in 45 minutes. You are not, you don't even have 2 minutes per question. You are expected to be able to move fairly quickly through these through your native English ability. And by native, I don't mean that you were born with it. I guess that's what the word means. Native ability in terms of the innate skill that you already have. There's no problems to figure out. So here's a good example of a problem. So there are a total of 5 passages. So you can expect 5 passages every time, and 2 types of multiple choice questions. This is the first type, and this is the more common of the 2, where anything from a word to a longer phrase will be underlined. A number will appear underneath that number, and that will correspond to a particular question on that underlined bit. It's not always easy, though, because one of the options will always be that you can just not change it, that you can leave the answer as is, that it's correct as written mechanically. And again, since we're dealing with mechanics and usage today, that's what we're dealing with on those. So you'll choose from one of 4 things. So, for example, this one's on number 4, so it's not the first one, it's this one here. But because these appear in passages, you usually have to have an idea of the context. The numbers will be in order, roughly, although of course note that 5 and 15 both go here. The underlined ones will be in order. So he wasn't always so resistant to flying, although he has always been afraid of it. As to the former, when he was 11 years old, my parents took him on a trip to Disneyland. He got on the plane without incident, but as soon as he heard the engine start up, he covered his ears with his hands and kept them there for the duration of the 3-hour flight. On the way home, he did precisely the same thing. So, we have to determine what, if anything, is wrong with this sentence when we read it. It helps to have some idea before you even hit the answer choices whether you think it's wrong, and if it is wrong, what should the right answer look like? So we have something here about he got on the plane, but, so we're talking about a guy's fear of flying, or a kid's fear of flying. He got on the plane with no trouble, but, so we are expecting then for there to be some trouble. So our choices are leaving it as it is. As soon as he heard the engine start, he covered his ears, or owing to the fact that he heard the engine start, he covered up his ears. Because of his hearing the engine start up, he covered his ears, or since he will have heard the engine. So, we can get rid of the since. We have to decide between these 3, and again, we'll get into the details on this, but both of these have extra words in them, owing to the fact that. Do we need to say that? It is grammatically correct, but it's simpler just to say that as soon as he did it. It also gives us a time reference that choice B doesn't have. And then while C has a because of his hearing the engines start up, we really want it to be, again, a time thing rather than a reason. So here we would choose choice A. So this is just an example. The underlined type of question could be any, it could be grammar, style, organization. Any of the types that we've seen could be an underlined passage, but just know that that's how these are going to work. So knowing the directions beforehand for those is pretty handy. The words and phrases will be underlined and numbered. We talked about that. And they'll correspond with sets of alternative words and phrases given in the right-hand column of the test booklet, again, in order. And you need to choose the answer that works best. I've mentioned this a couple times before. There will be answers or sets of answers that include more than one grammatically correct answer. This is somewhat disturbing, but again, disturbing only in the sense that if you simply were obeying the grammar rules, you could get these questions wrong, because there are other principles, other things that they're aiming for in the correct answers on the test. So if more than one is quote-unquote correct, you need to choose the one that is best. This is different from simply choosing the only right answer. There is still only one answer, one right answer, but one best answer, but there may be more than one, strictly speaking, grammatically correct one. And you'll usually be offered the option of no change. Every once in a while, you'll get one where they want you to replace something to perhaps change the direction of the sentence or the passage to have it say something else. Or they just have one more wrong answer choice that they want to tempt you with that somebody wrote and they want to use it. No change. It's as valid and as frequently right as any of the other answer choices. So don't dismiss it just because it's the first one. Sometimes it's going to be right. Okay, so then the other type that we talked about, and I alluded to them and pointed to them before, here we have the exact same passage, and it's even the same section. So these are these box questions. Like that, you know, there's a box around something. Anyway, that's that section down here, where we have a 5 and a 15 in a box. Those will very often go to, because you're not changing a section of the passage that already exists, they need to exist in the spaces between paragraphs. And so sometimes they will relate to the overall organization. Other times they will simply be adding one more sentence, as is the case with this one. If all of the following are true, which one would be the most relevant addition to the final sentence of the paragraph? The thing starting, and we're replacing the thing. Starting with the thing, replacing thing period with thing, comma. Every one of these starts with a thing and then a comma. So, just to remind us, on the way home he did precisely the same thing. What thing did he do? He covered his ears as soon as the engine started, because he didn't like flying. Anyway, that's okay. And then he kept his hands on his ears for 3 hours straight. And on the way home he did precisely the same thing. So we need to continue the thought that he demonstrates a fear of flying. So, he did precisely the same thing, and this time the weather was clear and the flight was smooth. So this time the weather was clear and the flight was smooth implies an opposition to perhaps the weather not being clear and the flight not being smooth. But there's nothing like that in the passage we just read. So while A is totally grammatically correct, it's completely contrary to what the passage is about, so this can't be right. On the way home he did precisely the same thing, except this time he put his hands over his ears as soon as he sat down in his seat. So this is continuing the idea that the kid is afraid of flying. So, you know, on that note, we can put a little smiley face next to this one as a possible keeper. We'll check the other answers, though, because, again, we need to choose the best answer. And, again, just because we found one that fits doesn't mean it will be the best one. We always need to check all of our answer choices. He did precisely the same thing because my mother had a seat 2 rows behind him. Well, he's afraid of flying, not afraid of listening to his mother. So he wouldn't be putting his hands on his ears because his mom was there. I mean, maybe in a different story where, you know, he wasn't always so resistant to his mother's talking, but that's not what this passage is. So we can get rid of this one. And then on the way home, he did precisely the same thing, and he also did not eat any of the airplane food. Well, again, possible in a different story. He wasn't always so resistant to airline food, but that's not what this one is about. So we can pretty confidently eliminate these 3 and choose B. So that's how these box sentences or box questions work. We'll be seeing several types or several examples of these over the course of these lessons because right now we're kind of giving you the highlights. We're not doing a whole passage yet. Pretty soon we will be going through whole passages, giving you the full range of things that you can expect to see. So again, knowing the directions beforehand, those boxes should not come out of nowhere for you. They refer to sections of the passage or to the passage as a whole. The ones that refer to the passage as a whole will be at the end. In the right-hand column, you'll be asked questions about or given alternatives for the sections marked by the boxes. In this particular case, the one that we just did was alternatives for the box because it was replacing the sentence that came before. And again, choose the answer choice that best answers the question or completes the section. More than one could work. All the ones that we just had were grammatically correct, and no change was not an option because we were looking for something that further expanded on the ideas in the passage. So again, we want the best answer, not just the first one that sounds correct. So you do need to read all of the answer choices and consider them. I guess I've said that twice in maybe the past minute, but I guess that's how important it is. Yeah. So, okay. Moving on. So English section basics, the summary, the section tests proper grammar, punctuation, and rhetorical skills. Again, this is in terms of and the rhetorical skills are the part that's the rhetorical skills, whereas the proper grammar and punctuation are the usage and mechanics. summary of our tips. So let's just cover these because these are actually well worth your while. Read grammar questions aloud. And I guess I really need to add here, in practice. You don't want to be shouting over your fellow test takers when you're doing this on the real test day. So I guess when you do your real full-length practice tests, and I do recommend doing those as part of your build-up for the exam, at least a little bit, just so you get used to that pacing and what it feels like to sit there for that long and focus. Anyway, read the grammar questions aloud, especially at first, to get a sense of what sounds right. I alluded to this before when I was talking about how this part of the ACT is testing more of something that you already know than some of the other sections. Reading them aloud helps you see what sounds right to you. On top of that, if something sounds wrong to you, but then when you review it, it turns out that that's actually right, definitely mark those down, because that's how you can determine what parts of this you need to study. Yes, I have all faith in your abilities to speak English to people and stuff like that. This is not a reflection on your ability to speak English. This is a reflection on your ability to take a specific type of test on English. And there are certain things that it may be testing that may not be as familiar to you, even though it's a language that you're speaking or listening, and a language that you're definitely listening to right now. Anyway, so reading aloud in practice gives you that extra oral reinforcement of both what sounds right and then what sounds wrong can tell you what you need to study and what you need to correct. You definitely need to read the entire passage. Skimming is bad, okay? The reason it's bad is because, you know, that the one we just had, even, where we had to complete, or we had to replace the end of that passage or the end of that paragraph, really, with a new bit. If we had just skimmed for the other ones grammatically, we'd have to go and read that whole thing anyway, or just guess, and all four would be plausible, you know, for different, had the passage been slightly different, they could have been the right answer. So read the entire passage. You're after the author's point of view, whatever evidence they have, their purpose, and then the style and tone. This is actually very similar to what you do when you're reading in the reading section, because you are asked often similar types of questions. The format's different, of course, but you need the same level of understanding of the English passages that you get of the reading passages. And again, find the best answer choice. Hopefully you don't just like shut off this video because you're sick of me saying it, but really, more than one answer is plausible and you could argue that it's correct. Only one is correct and will be correct for very specific reasons. You need to choose the best answer according to the ACT English's principles, not just whatever one, the first one that sounded okay.